not just that 5,000 Syrians have been killed since March. The UN Human Rights Commissioner reports that the toll is 1,000 people higher than the estimate she herself released just 10 days ago. Paris, through its ambassador at the UN, holding the Security Council, quote, morally responsible. An immoral stance. That's the Russian response. Moscow, which so far doesn't believe in sanctions. Now that we've established that the rhetoric is rising along with the death toll, what will the West do? What outside pressure can be brought to bear? And we're also going to look at how Syria is weathering the storm. What with the French accusing Damascus of using Hezbollah as a proxy to take potshots at its UN peacekeepers in South Lebanon. Today in the France 24 debate, 5,000 killed and counting. And joining us to talk about it, Syrian activist Sadek Salem. Thanks for being with us. The French Foreign Ministry spokesperson Vincent Floriani, welcome.
Good evening.
She's a Dutch member of the European Parliament, Marietje Schaake, who joins us from Strasbourg. Thank you for being with us.
Good evening.
And from the University of Oklahoma, Joshua Landis, whose SyriaComment.com is a great source for news about a country where it's often hard to get the news. Welcome, sir.
It's a pleasure being here.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and also on Twitter, where our handle is @FrancoisF24. Let's begin, if you will, with a closer look at what the United Nations human rights boss Navi Pillay said. She requested a closed-door session of the Security Council and for the Assad regime to be referred to the International Criminal Court. The figures are startling: 5,000 killed, including some 300 children, 14,000 detained, and 12,400 refugees so far. Of course, not everyone agrees with her, as you're about to hear.
She allowed herself to be misused in misleading the public opinion by providing information based on allegations collected from 233 defectors. How could defectors give positive testimonies on the Syrian government? Of course, they will give negative testimonies against the Syrian government. They are defectors. These people are infected with the disease called Syrianophobia.
Vincent Floriani, do you feel like you're infected with Syrianophobia?
No, not really. I mean, what matters for us is to stop the massacre that is going on in Syria. You've got an independent person, Mrs. Pillay, who just gave her testimony before the Security Council, saying that 5,000 people have been killed so far, among them children. Tens of thousands of people are in prison. Many of them are tortured. I mean, this is unacceptable.
Let me ask you, Sadek Salem, you were telling us before we went on air, we were just trying to, every day you're trying to compile the numbers from back home. You're from Haran in the south.
From Haran.
And you say that...
country of Daraa, so-called Daraa.
What's the latest you've learned from friends and relatives there?
Now we have a city, 2 cities, Daraa and Al-Hrak, are being attacked now while speaking with you.
This is what people told you today, speaking on my Skype.
Today, before being here, actually. I try to be calm this time. Actually, friends and activists, my relatives in Syria, have been telling me today that they have been attacking the army. The Assad army is attacking Al-Hrak, is attacking Daraa, Al-Mleha. They have just announced they have kidnapped two young men, Rami Hariri and Abdel Halim al-Zabi, one of 40,000 detained prisoners in Syria, kidnapped actually. They are not prisoners because we don't know where are they. So they are kidnapping just young men, and we don't know really where are they going to, what are they going to happen with them. So it's humanitarian. It's not just about politics. It's not just about powers. It's awful actually. I repeated it many times here with you. So I'm not wasting the time by telling details, but you know and everybody know that we have terrorists in Syria.
Joshua Landis, let me ask you, that spike in the killing that's over just the last 10 days, do you have that sort of independently confirmed, and do you have any reasons to think why and where this is all happening?
Well, we've seen a growing violence in Syria, and the state resources are beginning to collapse. There is very little energy. There's no mazot for heating oil. There's very little cooking gas. It's hard to find. Electric cuts are prevalent in cities like Aleppo. So resources are collapsing. We've got more and more guns coming into Syria by all reports into various groups under the umbrella of what's called the Free Syrian Army that are attacking the state military, and the military is attacking back in perhaps a irresponsible way, but the death rate is rising. And I think what we're seeing is the beginning of, some people have said we're seeing the beginning of a civil war. The UN said this. And, whether that's the right word or not, what we're beginning to see is more armed conflict throughout Syria and a growing death rate. And that's going to continue to rise, I suspect.
Marietta Schaake, I know that at the European Parliament you've been debating this very issue this Tuesday. What's your reaction when you hear what Joshua Landis is reporting there?
Well, we're all very, very concerned about the ongoing crackdown on largely peaceful demonstrators and citizens who are not even participating in any kind of political activity at all. And I think that the responses by the ambassador of Syria to the UN, as well as by Bashar al-Assad himself in an interview last week, show that he, as the head of government and also the commander-in-chief effectively, is completely unwilling to take any responsibility. And if it is so that, as they say, that we have the wrong perception of what is happening in Syria, then why are they deploying 400 tanks around a city with citizens inside? Why are children being tortured to death and delivered to the doorstep of their parents? It seems like a very irrational and a very, very irresponsible answer. And it is high time that the international community steps up its effort to prevent even more deaths and violence from taking place.
All right, the international community, though, which seems to have a bit of a problem, and that is the Security Council. Right now, there's gridlock. The word morality, liberally traded in the showdown that's shaping up in New York at the Security Council.
It is scandalous that the Security Council cannot put pressure on the Syrian authorities. The Security Council is morally responsible for what is happening today in Syria and for the suffering of the Syrian people.
Our draft resolution is on the table. If those who refuse to put pressure on the armed extremist wing of the opposition accuse us at the same time of blocking the work of the Security Council, I would call such an approach simply immoral.
Vincent Floriani, is France supporting, as Sergei Lavrov seems to be implying, an armed extremist wing of the opposition?
No, not at all. I mean, there have been rumors, I know, but we are not. What we're trying to achieve is to stop the killings in Syria, the killings of the Syrian people by the regime. So we have been trying to work in Brussels by adopting sanctions, EU sanctions, in New York by trying to have a resolution passed by the Security Council, but unfortunately it was blocked by Russia. We are working also in Geneva in the Human Rights Council, and we are working with the Arab League, which is taking a leading role now, and we're very much supporting the Arab League.
And do you have any word on, there's been allegations that there were maybe even French commandos inside Turkey helping to train the Syrian defectors?
Yes, we have denied that. I mean, it's a ploy by those who are against any action to stop the killings in Syria.
Joshua Landis, on that score, does what Sergei Lavrov hold any truth in it?
Well, it depends what your policy is. What we've just heard, though, is that economic sanctions are somehow going to lead the government of Syria to stop opposing the revolution and shooting at Syrians. I don't know where and why Europeans and Americans, too, believe that sanctions are going to stop the government. Sanctions are designed to bring a halt to economic activity. They will starve people, and already sanctions have achieved part of their ends, which is to begin to crash the Syrian economy. People are beginning to freeze in Syria, and shortly I suspect they'll begin to starve as well. Now, we've seen 6 sanction regimes imposed on Middle Eastern countries, some of them for decades, as in Iraq. Not one of those sanctions regimes has brought down a government or caused regime change. Only military intervention has caused regime change in Middle Eastern countries, in Iraq and Libya. Why anybody would suspect that economic sanctions are going to stop the killing rather than increase the death rate by starving people is beyond me.
Marietta Schaake, do you support sanctions?
I'm very critical of sanctions, and I think it very much depends on what they're designed for. But sanctions are certainly not the only thing that the EU is talking about. There are very specific measures that we are proposing here in the European Parliament and that have been adopted on the EU level. For example, we want to stop the export of certain technologies which are used to track, trace, survey, monitor individuals who are using internet and mobile phones in Syria. And so I think that's a very targeted measure which is appropriate, is important for the EU's credibility, and shows that the EU wants to stand with the people of Syria and has nothing to do with seeking to destroy the Syrian economy. The EU, on the other hand, is very conscious of targeting those who are responsible with also diplomatic sanctions, for example, or by talking with them directly, and to make sure that the broader population does not get hit by these measures. So the EU is very conscious of that risk, but we cannot stand by as we see thousands of people being killed. Therefore, we also work with countries in the region. This is not something the EU is doing alone. We cannot do it alone. We rely on partners like Turkey very much. We talk intensely with the Arab League countries. So this is a joint effort, and it's an effort over which countries like Russia, who are blocking UN Security Council actions, should probably come up with alternatives if they cannot support a mandate by the UN Security Council. I think it is upon them to explain what they propose to stop the killing of unarmed civilians. And I do think that standing by and watching is absolutely not an option.
Vincent Floriani, if Russia suddenly had an epiphany and would sign on the dotted line, what would they be signing up to? What would you like to see the UN Security Council do?
2 things, mainly. First of all, condemning what's going on in Syria, and secondly, allowing observers to go to Syria and to monitor what's going on. Actually, the Arab League has proposed to send 500 observers there. This is what we would like the Security Council resolution to endorse, to support.
And so no sanctions for now?
I mean, for the time being, we want to stop the killings. If it's a first step that the Russians can agree to, that would be fine for us.
Sadiq Salem, are you okay with all of that?
All of that is pretty much to talk about. Actually, we have such points. I agree with the sanctions. Obviously, I agree with Mr. Vincent that...
When you say you agree with sanctions, you agree with the sanctions that Marietta Schaake is proposing, or you agree with more stiffer sanctions?
All kind of sanctions, but I do think that observers with green passports, I do not... you have said that they have to be allowed. We have to force the regime to allow them to go in. It's not, we can force it. We can force it, not military, not just military. Actually, Blue Hat is a scenario, very acceptable scenarios. So sanctions are...
peacekeepers.
Yeah, we have already in the south of Syria with the border with Israel. We do have such forces. Actually, we do have many choices and many ways to help Syrian people. So actually, I just want to say to dear Joshua Landis, he's been talking about civil war. I think 7 months, because I saw him in this very plateau 7 months ago, and it's actually the Syrian regime is always talking about civil war, so that he can be the solution of it. It's not a civil war. we need it's
right,
not necessarily.
How do you explain the spike in deaths? There are reports that there are more and more defectors. That there are more and more people
we do have.
shooting.
It's a natural thing. But it's
the Free Syrian Army. Is that not the beginning of a civil war?
By definition, it's not a civil war. We have it's some kind of self. I don't know. It's a kind of a natural reaction. Right, it's not something which is very organized, so that we can tell. Actually, we have a civil war when you have two teams, if you will, two leagues.
Right, let me ask Joshua Landis, because this is a case where semantics matter. Is it the beginning? Is it really the beginning of a civil war right now?
You know, a civil war, I'm happy to agree that this is not a civil war yet. I don't know what the definition of a civil war is, but there's a lot of civil conflict going on. And what we are likely to see in the future is not two big forces facing each other, the government army and a central opposition army. What we're seeing today is increasingly the government is incapable of opposing and bringing order to Syria. Every week, things get worse for the Syrian government. And the opposition, however, is not centralized. Lots of little groups that are opposing the regime have grown up throughout Syria. Some of them are armed, some of them are not armed. We know from good journalist reports in the last few weeks in the New York Times, The Guardian, I've had great stories about how there's tons of military arms being smuggled in, that small groups are forming, that the Syrian Free Army is not in charge of this process. But there isn't a lot of central command structure and hierarchy. What we're going to see, I think, in the future is the collapse of real law and order in Syria progressively. Citizens, the state, and state institutions are beginning to crumble. We've seen lots of videos of schools, for example, teachers railing against the Ba'ath Party and the failure of Syrian schools. This regime is failing. There is nothing to replace it. The Syrian army remains quite strong. And what we cannot see on the horizon is any force that is going to overturn and destroy the Syrian army and march into the presidential palace and force President Assad to resign or to kill him. And that's what we don't see. And we don't see foreign intervention either. Nobody wants to get involved in military operation in Syria. Certainly not the American government, which has overturned two Middle Eastern governments, is talking about bombing Iran. And the American army does not want to get into a third war in the Middle East. And I just suspect that none of the Europeans, despite this constantly raising the rhetorical level of condemnation of Syria, not one European country, I suspect, wants to send their army into Syria now or have close air support as they did in Libya. So they're going to condemn, but they're not going to do. And in that sense, I think what we're seeing is the deterioration of the situation in Syria and an increasing collapse of the central government, I'm going to
have to cut you off there just for now, sure. Joshua Landis. When we come back, we'll look at some of the scenarios that might be on offer. Marietta Shaka mentioning Turkey. We'll talk about that when the France 24 debate returns.